Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. And this is their podcast, Couples Synergy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Connections again. I'm Angela, and I'm happy to be here with you all. Dr. Ray and Jean are going to be talking about ways that fear can damage your relationships. There's lots of different sorts of relationships. One that we'll focus on tonight is a partnership, a romantic relationship, because we just came off of a wonderful weekend intensive in Lakeside, Michigan. So you'll probably be hearing a lot about that. If at any point in time you have any questions or comments, please participate. We love it. It enriches a conversation. Remember, we're doing this virtually, but that means that we want to connect with you. That's why we do these live every week at 8 p.m. So if you want to comment, please do ask us questions and we'll answer them live. But for now, here's Dr. Ray and Jean. Hello.
Hello, Angela. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm, coming off feeling energized, having a full day and having a full weekend as well.
It was a very full weekend, wasn't it?
It was fabulous.
Angela was an awesome coordinator for the whole weekend. She did a great job. It was amazing. And it was just so much energy, so much excitement. And we're still kind of, jazzed up from it.
Yeah.
Hey, Brad. Thanks for joining. Hey, Kristen. Thanks for joining.
Hi.
Hey, this has been, it's been such a whirlwind, right?
Yeah.
And tonight's topic actually comes from someone who was on the weekend and they had a suggestion that we talk about fear, right? Because fear is the first emotion that exists and in all species across the planet. So we're going to get into that, but we want to talk a little bit about the weekend because, this couples weekend intensive was just that. It was intensive. And, as someone described, it was kind of like this roller coaster, where we just kind of took people on a ride and really drove that connection just so much intensity. I can't even use words to describe, how this weekend went.
One thing I want to say about why we did a weekend versus, the once a week work that we do with couples and couple to couple is in those sessions, stuff comes up and they go back into their world and then they slide back into their old habits. There's not enough time and space of practice and staying in it and going deeper. And so was exactly what we were attempting to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely.
We absolutely accomplished it by having a lot of fun also. If you listen to our first podcast episode that talks about 3 things you can do right now to improve your relationship, we made sure all those elements were there, right?
Yeah, plus more.
Right. But the surprise and new experiences and that touch and just, it was fabulous. It was great to watch all the couples transform. And I don't know, it was just lovely.
One thing that was really awesome for us, I think, is the fact that we were able to be there with people. Like, we've been doing this, Tuesday night webinar for quite a long time now.
Yeah.
And unless you guys say something or comment or ask a question, we have no idea who we're really talking to. I mean, we could be talking to an empty room, really, and to see everyone's faces, to interact with people, especially coming off of COVID, it was just so much great energy and excitement in the room. So we're just going to continue to take some of that energy that we got this weekend and we're going to dose it out to you out there, whoever's out there today.
If we're going to talk about the topic of fear, fear is a natural emotion that we have that is there to help us react in a way that can literally save our lives, right? So if you see a bunny just hopping around, when they sense danger, they freeze. And that freezing makes them sort of invisible in their environment. And so who's ever the predator is around potentially won't see them and they'll live. And what happens in relationships, especially with the freeze response, so we're not talking about anger in terms of the fight response, but more of the freeze or the flee response, is that's another thing we noticed is that couples tend to avoid their issues. They tend to avoid difficult conversations. They avoid, you gonna say something?
No, I
Took
just
a
no,
breath.
keep going. I'm ready. I'm ready.
We're really casual today because we gave a lot and we're just still like settling back down.
Right.
But when we get into that freeze place, couples can freeze for, it's so amazing to me. Like I've worked with people who've like, maybe they found out their partner's having an affair and they won't mention it for months.
Yeah.
Months. And if you're hearing this
after they find out, they
Yes.
don't talk about it.
they don't talk
It's
about
not
it.
that it's a secret for months. It's just they know about it and then it
No,
just
even someone that
swipe it under the
that
rug.
found out but didn't tell their partner that they know.
Oh yeah, that's
Right?
right. Okay.
And or other things, they're suspicious of something, they saw something and they just keep it. Because when we expose fear, we have to tend to it. We were watching this movie once called Miracle, which is the team of the hockey players that win the Olympics
It's 1980.
in 1980.
USA Olympic hockey team, and that they beat the Soviet Union. Yeah.
And you can tell it's a different era because the coach is really, really, really hard on the guys, right? And he doesn't let them off the hook because he really wants to push them to deliver their best. And, one of the things we said is
to push through their fear.
Yeah.
There was a fear of the Soviet Union, which they dominated hockey for 20 years.
Right.
In winning the gold medal every single time the Olympics came on. And every team was afraid of them.
When he was putting them through those drills and physically exhausting them, I just had the thought, like, they don't feel any anxiety. They can't have a panic attack. They're too exhausted.
Right.
They're way too exhausted. And you could see through the movie, which was really fascinating to watch the training that he put that team through, that almost everyone around him thought, I don't think you should be doing that.
So I just want to back up a little bit, all right, and talk a little bit about fear and how it shows up in the brain. Hey, Deb, Dennis, how you guys doing? So fear is the first emotion that every species on the planet starts with, and fear is designed to promote survival, right? If we didn't have fear, we would just start walking off cliffs, and our species would not survive. So as species started to evolve, and especially human beings, we developed more emotions. And each emotion that we have serves a purpose, okay? Like anxiety, for example. We have to worry about, the winter that's coming, because if we don't worry about that, then we're not going to, find food and shelter and clothing and prepare for it, and we'll die out. So, for example, anxiety and worry exist for that reason. But fear, just like a lot of the emotions, there isn't a dimmer switch to the emotion. It's either on or off. And so when it's on, it is designed to constantly scan our environment and look for threats, right? And it is just going to constantly look for the threats. And once it sees a threat, then we can attend to it. And we can attend to it either by, fleeing or freezing or fighting, okay? And those are our responses to fear. But in our environment today, we don't have those threats and stressors that generations ago had to deal with. We don't have bears jumping out of the bushes unless you live in Alaska, but typically we have a roof over our head, we have food in the refrigerator, and we don't really have to worry about any of those basic survival skills. So our fear response, because it's still constantly scanning our environment, it's still looking out for threats. And so the way it plays out in a relationship is that it will start, once the switch is thrown on, it's going to start looking for things in your relationship to worry about, to be afraid of, because it brings up that really primal emotion and primal fear.
And so that's what we're talking about, the difference between physical threat and emotional threat. An emotional threat never resolves until we face it. It's in our heads. It's amazing to hear all the distortions, what people project onto other people, like, oh, that person's probably thinking this, and they're probably thinking about me. Or if I say this out loud, this person's going to respond like that. And the damage of that is that we never get to have a real relationship. It's always stays in the ethers or in this imaginary place, because we're actually grabbing the other person's power, which means choice of how they're going to respond by buttoning it up and not even letting them know what we're feeling. And the archetype of the warrior is about facing fear. And if you're in motion and you face your fear goes away. You can't be afraid and move at the same time. It's really not possible. Like if you're in a building and it's on fire, you're going to worry about getting out of the building and you're going to do whatever you can. You're not going to, somebody asks you, are you afraid? You're not afraid until you're safer. Until you get out of the building and you go, oh my gosh, that was so scary. Because we have to stay in motion. We're using different parts of our brain, and fear ends up being sort of a luxury in relationship. And one of the couples said, this is funny, a word that ends in it, rhymes with it.
One of the couples on the
and
weekend
begins with sheesh.
Oh.
If you're having a sandwich, the best way to eat it is as soon as possible. And this is a couple who's been waiting years to tend to difficult things.
And one bite at a time, right?
one bite at a time. Right? And the years and years that they've been avoiding the judgment of other people, it is creating its own life. It is damaging them internally in their relationship as a couple. And the external people haven't even responded to them yet because they haven't actually shared that, maybe they're in a relationship yet. So it's a really interesting thing to watch how different people tend to fear. Like for me, I grew up in a home that a lot of that stuff wasn't talked about. And so when I learned to talk about it, I have a zero tolerance of keeping secrets. Like if I feel something instantly, you're going to know instantly, because everything between having that feeling and letting it out is really painful.
Yeah. It's
really painful. And we're so good at going through the motions and not speaking about things. And that was another comment we heard is we can really go months without talking about anything. We know we got some big problems, but we can go months. Wow. I cannot tolerate that because I had a whole childhood full of it that felt really bad. And then once I could start talking about it, it's like, well, if you talk about it, you can tend to it. You can put it out there. You could look at it. And whatever happens, you'll find yourself okay.
Speaking of the weekend, I just kind of want to acknowledge this one comment here. And, Kristen had said I came home with a new marriage, because that is really, that just hits, really deep here. So really, thank you so much. And we're so glad that, it made that so much of an impact, on your marriage. And, one of the things that we talked about on the weekend was the fear of abandonment and the fear of rejection, and how powerful those fears are within our relationships. And when we first start out in a relationship, it's very new, and there isn't really much that we are afraid of at that point. There's very little risk.
Right. Because the other person can't really hurt you yet.
Right. Right. And so there's very little invested at that time. So very little risk of being hurt. If the person leaves you, you're not really going to be hurt that much. You might be a little angry or annoyed, but you haven't invested enough for that to be, a huge devastating blow.
Yeah. Your money's not immersed together.
Right.
The kids aren't a thing. Like all
you don't have assets.
Right.
It's not going to be a really big deal. I mean, what do you do?
Your whole
You have
life
to
doesn't blow up, just your heart.
split up your CD collection. People
Here's
don't
your
have
t-shirt
CD
bag.
collections anymore. though.
And what about the additional relationships when you're really committed with someone, the additional relationships you have with their family? And then you have mutual friends, right?
Right. And so now this investment isn't just between the two people in the relationship. The investment is extended family, and so because of that, in the beginning, you could talk about anything. Could talk about politics and have differing opinions about that. Could talk about religion and have differing opinions about that. But as that relationship continues to move forward, and as those topics, the investment gets bigger and bigger, greater and greater, couples tend to start to back off on talking about those topics, and they start tiptoeing around each other because they don't. I mean, the intention is, I don't want to hurt my partner. I don't want to get my partner upset. I don't want them to leave me ultimately. I don't want them to reject me ultimately. And so those fears start to, manipulate the communication and the connection that a couple has.
Yeah. And fear is an interesting thing because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so when we're afraid of something, we sort of project things onto it and we want it to make sense. We're seeing this a lot in the world with COVID and our politics, even though we're all sick of talking about that. But we create a story. We create a scenario that we believe is real, whether we know it's real or not. And then that becomes our reality. And that was one of the amazing things. And I thought about doing this. It was an amazing thing on the weekend because, everyone was unplugged. And so we didn't know what was happening in the world. And so we were creating what was happening in the moment with the people in the room. And there was not any external impact except for the lady that kept walking through the room. But anyways, when I was in the Army, they did this to us where, we had no contact with radio or newspapers. This is back in the day, there wasn't cell phones. Radio, newspaper, TV, whatever. And you're, 7 weeks into basic training and they walk in the room and they're like, we just went to war and this is happening and you guys are going to be activated and you're going to go to a war zone. And, and you have no way of knowing if that's true or not. And it wasn't true when I was going through that, but they tell you it is. And you, in your head, it becomes so real. And I remember that realness of, oh crap, this is what we're being trained for. We're actually going to have to now go and execute. And then you find out later, none of that was true. And so often in our heads, we've created these scenarios, the what ifs. What if this happens? And we're tending to all this stuff and not reality. And when we do that, we actually superimpose all this stuff on other people around us. And so, a lot of times our fear is, how is someone else going to react? How are my parents going to react? And when you're new in a relationship and you're a single person, a lot of your needs are being met by friends and family and coworkers and those people out there. And you're trying to take that energy and move it over into the relationship. Mm-hmm. And I always think it's interesting if we have a lot of friends in our wedding party, a lot of times after the wedding, we don't really see them again because our life just changes so much. And we have that fear, and those people become more important than our partner. What are they going to think? And when we do that, we can't allow our partnership to really begin to flourish when we worry about what other people think. And I've never seen the scenario where someone really shared a fear, something that was in their heart, something they felt shame to share, or embarrassment, or something that was not immediately followed by a healing response in whatever direction that happened in. Have you?
If it wasn't, it's a very toxic relationship. You shouldn't be with the person anyway. But I think that, to follow your point, one of the things that people are really afraid of is not being accepted by their partner. You know, the fact is that we are not perfect people. You know, we are fallible. We make mistakes, and we are going to make mistakes in our relationships. And those mistakes are ultimately going to cause pain to our partner. That is something, and we've said in, countless podcasts and probably in these video calls, is that pain or mistakes and hurting your partner is inevitable. That is going to happen. Now, how couples, respond to that, how do they recover from that? That's a different story. And that takes skill and tools and practice and connecting, in order for them to heal from that and to grow and to move on. But we try to kind of censor our words, and we try to protect ourselves because we don't want to be rejected by our partner. We don't want to be judged by them. We want to be accepted by them, and that causes this distance that grows and grows and grows. And as Jean is talking about, in that distance, we superimpose what our beliefs are about our partner. We start to not understand who they are in this moment and this ever evolving moment. We superimpose our own fears and our own judgment and make them out to be a monster. And over time, fear can be a very destructive force and start to deteriorate that bond between a couple.
Some of you may or may not know that I like to study numerology. And in numerology, what you do is you convert the letters into numbers. So A is 1 and B is 2. And the word pain actually resonates to 22. So P is the 16th letter, and you add the 1 and 6 together, and that's 7. A is the first, that's 8. 9 is the I. So we'll be up to 9, and 8 is 17. And the N is the 14th letter, and 4 and 1 is 5, and that adds up to 22. And don't worry about the math, but just get the concept. So pain resonates to the number 22, which is a master number. My throat is so bad from talking so much.
From talking all weekend.
And having a lovely time. And so this idea of 22 is a master builder, right? And pain is the seed of something building, cracking open. And it sucks. It always sucks. Anything you want to do, when you get into it, and if we get back to that movie Miracle, those guys were in tons of pain, and then and when you watch that, and that's why these stories are so wonderful, because that big picture about why are we here? We're here to have these fabulous growth experiences, and the precursor is pain. And the man who coached them, he got cut 1 week before the Olympic Games as a player
in 1960.
Yeah, whatever year was it?
1960.
Whatever year it was. But he trained with the team. He was part of the team. He was supposed to go to the Olympics, worked his off, and they cut him, and he never got a chance to be in the game. Never got a chance to show up. And the team won, and they all got the gold medal, and he had to sit and watch, even though 1 week before he was part of that family, part of that energy. And it was such a painful emotion for him, such a life-altering event, that he chased it. And he chased it to the point where he went back and coached this winning team. And he came up with a completely new model and a completely different agenda of how to tackle this issue in terms of facing, was in particularly the Russians, who had been winning year after year after year, and no one could touch them. And because they had kept winning, everyone had this big fear of them, like, oh, they're untouchable and they're so amazing. and we all just kind of suck. And he systematically brings them through this thing, and it starts with this, like, you got to create this space for that pain, for that seed to crack open, and for life to come in and start to grow. And the other part of it is, the more you feed that seed and the more you grow through your pain, the less pain you feel. And I promise you, avoiding it never makes the pain go away at all.
Are you
just sit in
saying
it.
fear is part of being in a relationship?
I would say fear is a direct arrow pointing out where in your relationship you should grow.
I'm kind of going back to one thing that a couple said at the end, and that is, they said that they were afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're
To go
afraid to go home.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because they had made so much changes, and now they were facing the world, like going back to, the world, and not wanting to slip back to the old way of doing things, and that's a really great sign. Fear is a very powerful emotion, and it lets us know that there is something that we need to attend to, and it is going to come up in our relationships. And if we try to ignore it, it wreaks havoc. That which we ignore wreaks havoc in our lives. Mm-hmm. And when we are facing these really painful things that come up in our relationship, it is important to shine the light on it, right? Shine the light on it, because it is okay. It is only the things that we bring out into the light that we can actually address, and we can actually heal and actually attend to and grow from. And if we push them out into the dark, we shove them under the carpet, they're only going to grow over time. Ange, did you have a question?
Gabe's agreeing with our lights.
Oh, no, I was just doing the shine. I was doing what you guys were doing, shining the light. And by the way, I have lots of different lights that I can shine on me.
we got a couple agreed. We got Laura Sagan, she agrees, and we got...
Well, and you know what they're agreeing to? I'm sure everything you're saying, but specifically the quote that Jean said, avoiding it never makes the pain go away.
Oh, no. It actually makes the pain worse.
And, when you are in pain, your mind works very differently. Your mind, it starts to grow it into like a bigger thing. So if you think about like a balloon, it's like this little piece of rubber thing. And when you have fear, you breathe into that balloon and it goes, and you breathe some more, and it goes, like my sound effects.
First time I'm hearing this analogy. So.
And it looks like this huge looming thing that is so dark and so scary, this big entity that you've breathed life into. And then if you take a little pin and pop it, which means you face it, you put it out into the world, you tend to it, and then you hold that little piece of rubber and you're like, that's what I was afraid of. This little thing. And that's what fear feels like when we breathe into it. And fear usually happens when you're a little kid, like say 2 years old, and you fall down and bump your head. Immediately you are in shock, and you go and you look at your parent. And if your parent's going, you go, and if you look at your parent and they go, ha ha ha, you're like, ha ha ha, I'm going to bang my head a few more times. They don't know how to react. They're looking at the external world like, what was that? I bumped my head. I'm shocked. What was that? And the way the world responds to you is the way that you will learn to tend to the world. And so we have a lot of fear in this world right now. There's a lot of, it's really sad to go to, right by where we work out, there's a daycare center, and you see the 2-year-olds with masks on and the 3-year-olds with masks on. Mm-hmm. And they're growing up with this fear, and they're taught to, pull away from grandma because she might get you sick, or, all this those children are probably never going to recover from that and learn to really lean into people. They'll probably maybe always do the elbow or something. It'll be really difficult for them to overcome that.
And that makes me so sad.
Yeah.
Like I almost don't want to believe you, right? Because I don't think that of course I compare it to my own life being a child before a pandemic, never having a school year or two that were impacted by it and having to walk around in community with masks on and things like that.
Well, you remember, Ange, before when lockdown happened, I said to you, my worry is that, we had this normal, comfortable distance in the United States, right? And
more distant than Europe.
It was more distant than Europe. And yeah, it's very sad, Myra. And, now with this whole pandemic thing, I wonder how it's going to affect that distance. I wonder how much it's going to affect our greeting, right? When we greet people, we shake hands, we greet people, if we know them, we give them a hug, right? And so over generations now, how is that going to affect the way that we interact and greet people and come within close distance of people? I don't know if you remember me, mentioning that.
I absolutely do. And do you remember how I responded?
Yes, you were very worried about it.
I said, I mean, worried, but also like, I'm not interested in leaning into that at all as a reality,
Right. And, it is going to be very important for us adults to teach the next generation that this is something that is temporary. It is not something that's long-lived. And there are things to be afraid of all over in this world.
You want to know a secret? None of us are getting out of this alive.
And did you see what Michelle said?
Oh, yeah. It is definitely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And, your son is seeing this as normality.
Yeah. So that's more of his life has been this than not.
Right.
Of his conscious life. And you see that with people from the Depression, how they save things like cloth and string and bags that they don't seem to have value. But when you don't have them and you need them,
right,
it emphasizes that. And so, the word brave is really interesting. The Native Americans, that's what they called their young people, right?
The Braves.
They were the Braves because they had to go out and face an uncertain world with an uncertain future. And they absolutely encouraged it. And if you as an adult are showing your fear to your kids, then your kids are growing up with that fear too. And I absolutely agree. When you can actually change the narrative in their worlds. I know one family that they stopped having their kids go to school because they didn't want them to wear masks, but now they're isolated at home and they're not socializing, which, is another issue. And I'm telling you, I'm so glad our kids are older and not going through that and the challenges that you guys have as young parents.
Don't envy your position, and I think there's a difference between being cautious and being afraid, right? And there are certain things that bring up fear in us that we have to face. And in teaching our children how to face those things, it makes them become resilient. It makes them believe in themselves and find an inner strength that anything outside of themselves is not going to affect. Because there are countless stories in history of people that went against all odds. And people, normal people would say, wow, I would be terrified of that. I'd be afraid of that.
Every single person that's done anything incredible has had to face their fear. Whether it's the Wright brothers flying an airplane or people getting into a spaceship for the first time or probably any time, or even, moving from your home in Illinois and traveling to Washington, D.C. and starting a life there like Angie and Alec did. Right?
Who's that?
There was 100% uncertainty.
Well, and let's add to the list. How about going to the Lakeside Inn over 2 years ago and saying, hey, You know what I can imagine is a weekend intensive where we rent out the whole place and we do 4 days of intensive work with couples. And then being there, oh,
I remember Ange on Wednesday night when we're like, can you introduce us? And I don't know how much you felt fear, but you really dove into it.
yeah, I didn't. No,
Awesome.
no, I didn't. And actually, were you going to say something else about
Yeah,
that?
because we
yeah.
practiced and you jumped right in and figured out what you were going to say and you did your thing and it was like awesome, like right off the bat. And Ray had his idea what he was going to say. And then I was like, and this is dress rehearsal. I'm like, I don't think we have any idea what we are doing.
Dress rehearsal. You make it sound so
I know. I was
formal.
going to say, what? We were in informal. We were like, you know, a sweatshirt. Like, well, what I'll add, Jean, I don't know. Did you finish what you were saying?
Just that, you know, then the words come because you've practiced so much, you know.
I mean, you did get emotional too, right? That was part of it.
Yeah, and then your brain goes, what? Yeah.
So I would agree with you. I wasn't nervous when you told me, and when I started writing things down, and I started practicing, right, when I got the chance. But when it was time for opening ceremony, I think it wasn't until I walked into the stage area that I started talking. Okay, so all these steps, and I started talking, and in my head, I sounded so nervous, and I had like big gaps. It was just like I couldn't catch my breath when I was talking, and instead of saying I feel incredibly nervous right now, I said I'm feeling emotional, which only after thinking about it after the weekend, I think was true. And I chose to lean into that emotion. Oh, just being emotional, that idea, other than I'm incredibly nervous and you all know it. And this is a terrible way to start the weekend, right? All the spider web thoughts you could have.
You know, Ange, that's a really great point that you bring up because fear is such a very powerful emotion. You need a powerful emotion to shift out of it, right? When our brain goes from logic and reason into the emotional brain and that switch is thrown, you can't just switch it back. You can't talk your way out of it, right? Some people be like, oh, you just have to picture people in their underwear and then you're gonna not be afraid when you're speaking in front of an audience. No, that doesn't work, right? You have to use a powerful emotion, all right? And that's the only way to shift that energy. And what you did was feeling emotional, right? And so feeling like verklempt or feeling proud or feeling, you know, really like maybe even happy and joyous. And that's the way to shift that fear into something. It's almost like kind of channeling that energy into something much more powerful, right? And so when you're in a relationship and you have this fear, it's like, I don't want to tell my partner this. You know, I don't know if they're going to judge me. I don't know if they're going to yell at me.
If I'm going to hurt them.
If I'm going to hurt them, right? Mm-hmm. Then using a different emotion to channel that emotion, that powerful emotion of fear, is the best way to kind of get flow. And we talked about flow during the weekend, right? Stagnation is unhealthy and flow is healthy in a relationship, right? And so that is a way to really channel that, because fear can get you stuck, right? I mean, one of the responses to fear is freeze. And how many people just sit there and spend years and years in a relationship frozen?
You know, and we've talked about this before. When you have thoughts in your head, the thoughts in your head are what you know. And if you do the behaviors that you know, you're going to get the responses that you know. And whether those responses are good or bad, they're known. And so that reduces fear. And when we go from our heart is the unknown. And the unknown it makes your gut feel like it's on fire if you're saying something like that. And we've actually seen people shut their hearts down so much and not face their fears so much that they actually lose their relationship.
Yeah.
And they go through a breakup only to recreate it again.
Yep.
Because you can't get away from it.
Just like self-fulfilling prophecy.
You cannot get
Right.
away from whatever you are afraid of. The world, this earth that we're on, makes you, okay, you didn't face it there. We're going to bring you another scenario. Are you going to do it here? No, you have free will. You can say no again. You can go over here. You can say no again and again and again, but it doesn't stop coming at you. And people will absolutely let go of a person they actually really love.
Yeah.
In order to protect saying that and going into that unknown space. It's really heartbreaking. And that's how much damage fear can do.
Okay. And then just in regards to the bigger picture, as you were talking about how things happen historically to a society and getting through them, Deb shared a great comment with us.
That her aunt lived through polio times. Yeah, but you come through the other end, things get normal again. Yeah, they do. They do. And most people aren't able to focus on that, right? That it does become normal. And they don't help their kids, kind of transition into normality. They feed the fear. And that's the sad. That's the sad
when you
part.
look at really big things that are worldwide, this is worldwide, right? And there was a point before Transformations, we were watching Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
And they had this.
It's an old show, but we
get
got
so much
really
out
into
of it.
It's really awesome.
But it's set in a time in the early 1900s where the people who had the money, they just lived to maintain what they had. And then their working people, that was probably a great job for them, as opposed to like being in the fields or in the elements or something. They were able to live in this beautiful place. And the Downton Abbey is the home that they all live in, this huge home. And it goes through the war. And during the war, the wealthy people have to share. Their libraries become the hospital, and their spaces, and they even one of the daughters became a nurse, and she was working in it. And that was a time when women started to do things because the men went to war. So the women had to learn other things, and those create a different society. Even after whatever the crisis is goes away, something else gets born of that. And that's true whether it's the Holocaust or polio or COVID, and we're not on the other side of it. And it's probably the biggest thing most people on the planet right now have gone through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Unless you're, like 70 or older, it's probably the biggest thing we've gone through. And that's my hope too, is that, there's some lovely things happening. Like maybe families are spending more time together, and maybe we're going to change the way we raise our children. And like this other thing becomes something else. I'm just going to say the movie again because I'm having so much fun quoting this movie of Miracles. And in there, the other coach was like, what's his agenda? Does he just want all these kids to hate him? And the other guy on the team, the doctor, he's like, maybe he wants them to bond over hating him. And that's he's strategically doing that. And those things can kind of happen where we allow what we call grist for the mill, something difficult to go through so that we can move in a direction that we want things to go through. And as a couple and a person that's in relationships, whether it's your parents, your siblings, your kids, your partner, stepping into that place of fear, stepping in and holding yourself to that fire, that pit in your fire, because you don't know what's going to happen, and allowing that to go through its crescendo and resolve and see what's on the other side of that. Just like
because that's what's necessary.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we truly learn.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we always say is that relationships aren't meant to last forever.
Mhm.
At some point, a relationship is going to end. And so, if there's the fear of rejection, a fear of abandonment, it is going to prevent you from really learning what you're supposed to learn from your partner with the time that you have. And, so leaning into awkwardness and fear, when that comes up in a relationship, that is a signal that is something that you need to attend to. It's something you need to address. It's something you need to process together, because it is a point of growth, or an opportunity, I should say, for growth, and to get to that next stage, that next level in your relationship.
I think this is a perfect opportunity before meditation to pose that question to everyone. What you just said, Dr. A, was concerning what have you went through together? What have you pushed, maybe what fears have you pushed through with your partner? Or how would you phrase it?
I should say, what fears have you faced? Right? What fears have you faced together? And that's, I mean, we're all human beings here. We're all going through the human experience. And one of the most bonding experiences that we can have, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, is a connection with our primary partner. Right? And that is a very challenging, yet the most rewarding thing that we could ever have in our lives. And fear and facing fear in our relationship is part of that experience.
One of the fears that I had to face very early on in our relationship was marrying you.
Yeah, she talks about this all the time. It's so fearful to marry me.
And it wasn't about you. I
Yeah.
would have rather been in a shoebox alone with you. It was about being public.
Yeah.
And having been so betrayed by other men in my life that I felt sort of this big humiliation of standing in front of everyone I knew and letting them know that I loved you and I wanted to spend my life with you. And then how humiliating would that be when you would, like everyone else, do something that was
Hurtful, painful,
rejecting,
judgmental.
And I remember calling
I've
you at
got a
1 a.m,
list.
the morning of our wedding, and being like, I'm not doing this. And you helped me push through that. And, you're the one that wanted the big wedding. And it was such an amazing day that still carries a lot of energy for us, almost 24 years later, over 23
I was
years.
kind of a bridezilla.
He was. He was so cute in his little veil too.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So here's one. Gabe says career changes.
Yes.
It's a
Awesome.
huge fear.
Gabe, we remember you guys
Thank
going,
you, Gabe.
which is awesome.
There is this there's this documentary about a guy who climbed Half Dome. I think it's on Netflix.
The North Face.
Yeah, North Face of Half Dome. And there is a part where he gets to that he is really kind of stuck, because he has to jump from one crag of the rock to another, right?
Because there's no way out.
Because there's no way out. That's the only way. And he multiple times he tries, and obviously he's on a rope, and he's caught by the rope and everything. But that's kind of the fear that you face, especially when you're doing career changes. Especially when you're shifting from something that is safe and secure to something that isn't so safe and secure, and something that you have to create the safety and security, right? Versus someone who's created that safety for you. You got a pension, you got, medical plan, all of that stuff, set salary, all of that, and going to something that you have to create yourself. And we know that. I mean, we did it ourselves, and making that leap. And it's a very scary thing to do.
And, Gabe, I think you probably would agree with this, that when you get to the edge, right, where you don't know what to do, that guy that there was nothing to do but jump.
Yeah.
And you have to figure something else out in that way that makes you expand as a human being. And because the other option is going backwards. The other option is, well, I guess I could not do this and go back and work for someone.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've been an entrepreneur, it's like, ooh, that I would rather jump.
Yeah.
I'd rather jump and figure it out. And every time you're called to do that, like to me, that's exciting. It's exciting when we get stuck in a tight spot and we have to figure it out, because I know right on the other side of that is, this open water and such a great thing.
I have grown to realize that anytime the universe asks you to grow, there is that feeling of jumping that is associated with it, whether it be in your relationship, whether it be in your career. Your career is going to affect your relationship too, because I'm sure that if you're going to decide to make a career change, it is going to affect your spouse. Your spouse can be like, what? Why? It's going to affect their feeling of safety and security too. But that calling is so much more powerful than that fear.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to follow it, and you have to listen to it. And if there is something that you are just so afraid of telling your partner, if there's something that you are so afraid of doing, but in the pit of your stomach is telling you that this is the path, this is the opportunity, this is what's in front of me, you've got to take it.
Even if your whole world unravels, you wind up in a better place on the other side.
Even if your whole world unravels. Yes.
And trusting that process is so important.
That's powerful there.
And hearing that, I'm hopeful that the meditation is short, because I'm going to add one more thing. I was trying to think about fears that I've overcome in my relationship so that I could share as well. And with Gabe's great comment about career changes, I would say mine is similar, a little different, because of the environment of my husband's job. About half the people on the Hill lose their job, right? Every couple of years, depending on what side you're on. So it can be normal, but still very painful. And it's the fear of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And it came up today, meaning I was just sharing it with someone who I thought might find it helpful. The first time it happened, it was like close to devastating. And then the second time it happened, which was very sudden, it was not as devastating at all. I think we knew by then how to handle that uncertainty. And instead, we wanted to skip over all the worries about it and instead focus on our confidence and our realizing that we're going to be okay because we know what to do.
And you just kind of proved that point, Angie, is that, as a couple in a relationship, when you face those fears together, you start to build that faith, and not faith just as an individual person, you faith as a couple that you can handle whatever comes your way, no matter what, and that strength is going to get you to so many different levels that you never even knew was possible.
I love when people say that, like, I just can't do this anymore. Like, what choice do you have? And I laugh, and that always drives people nuts. All right. We have a few more minutes, a very few more minutes. So let's just close our eyes. And I want you to imagine that you're standing on the edge of that cliff. And across a very deep ravine, way, way down there, is a beautiful river, 60, 70, 80 feet down. And there's a really old bridge between where you are and the other side of that ravine of where your path is leading you. And you step on it and shake it a little bit, and it's very wobbly. It creaks. Maybe one of the railings falls off. And it seems very unsafe. But going backwards is not an option. And so you decide to test it, and you walk a few feet out, and it holds you. And you keep going. And one of the boards breaks loose and falls all the way down. And you realize that the structure of the bridge is starting to crumble. And without fear, you move as fast as you can to the other side. And as you're running across the bridge, it starts to unravel and crumble behind you. And at the last minute, you jump and find yourself on solid ground as the bridge lets go. Because you no longer need it. And it's done its job. And you can continue on your path. Going to places you've never been. With a sense of gratitude that that bridge unraveling and crumbling prevents you from taking any step backward into a place that was not good for you, that took courage to move away from, and took the option away of backsliding. And feel the ground underneath your feet and the strength in your body that you made it through that test. And allow yourself to feel that sense of joy as you continue on with confidence in your journey. And say a prayer of gratitude for your courage and for the bridge that fell away. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. Look at that, perfect timing. Boom.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Boom.
With your eyes closed, you knew it was perfect timing.
Yeah.
And some of you don't know that Gene actually has a fear of those
Uh,
wooden
ah.
rope bridges that go across. So I was very surprised that was your meditation. That's great. It's awesome. Face your fears,
A little
right?
easier in meditation than actually really doing it. Ah. And many hikes have those bridges. And
Yeah, that's true.
not a fan. All right. Have a wonderful week. We're going to rest up and start planning the next weekend intensive,
September.
which is September 9th through the 12th. It was amazing.
Be there.
We hope we see you there.
Until next time, synergize your life and synergize your love.